Hi, I'm Stella and welcome to my channel. This time around I am going to talk about some of the books that I read in March and some books that I am going to read. I actually haven't read all of these books because I'm quite a slow reader, especially in comparison to some other YouTubers and Bookstagrammer. Here on my channel of 30 books, I mainly talk about Australian books to encourage you to run out and buy or borrow, loan off a friend, an Australian book. Now here on YouTube, there's something called April Australia or Australian April, where you read Australian books, and it's pretty much something I do regardless. So as I mentioned, I've got a stack of books here and I am now going to divvy them up. I'm going to talk about what books I am or what books I have read first, and then talk about the books I am going to read. But before I do that, I want to talk about the STELLA Prize. I'm just going to get my notes. So the STELLA Prize is probably the biggest, well, maybe the only women's literature prize in Australia. I think I want to say it's 10 years old, but it actually might be. And the shortlist was announced recently. There's 6 books, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. So the STELLA Prize is named after Stella Maria Sarah Franklin, and who went by the name of Miles Franklin, of which the Miles Franklin Award is named after here in Australia, and that's one of probably the biggest literary prize, maybe next to the Prime Minister's Prize for literature in Australia. And what happened over the years of, decades of years, it's predominantly men won the prize. So the STELLA Prize was established by some enterprising women. And interesting enough, since the establishment of the STELLA Prize and also the STELLA count that they do about the amount of literary awards that women don't win and the amount of reviews that don't get written about them, they've actually all risen. And this year in the STELLA Prize, for the first time, they accepted poetry, and out of the 6 books that are in the shortlist, 3 are poetry books. Only one is a novel, 1 is a long essay, and 1 is a graphic novel. And I find this really exciting. And the other thing is there are a number of First Nation winners, and there's Filipina and trans or non-binary. And I just want to quote one of the judges, writer Melissa Lashenko, and she said, I've got to take my glasses off, in the aftermath of Black Lives Matter and #MeToo, STELLA writers are not holding back. Australian women and non-binary writers are producing innovative, sophisticated literature in very difficult times. It has been a great privilege to read and assess their work for the 2022 STELLA Prize. The shortlisted authors share 2 things. First, all 6 shortlistees undertake the essential work of any artist, paying attention to what is happening around them and interrogating that experience. Second, the authors have produced powerfully beautiful literature, sacrificing no art in their unflinching focus on justice, inclusion, and truth-telling. Now, these are the 6 shortlistees: The Drop Bear by Evelyn Araluan, No Document by Anwin Crawford, Bodies of Light by Jennifer Down, and that is the only novel. The other 2, I think, are poetry. Stone Fruit by Lee Lau, and Homecoming by Elfie Shiosaki. Oh, and Take Care by Eunice Andrada. I hope I pronounced everyone's name correctly. Now, I have read one of those books and I'm really hoping to have read, oh look, I don't think I'll be able to read all 6 by April 28th, which is when they're going to announce the winner. Now, let's talk about the books I have read in the month of March, and I'll probably be honest, maybe I was reading them in February as well. But so the first one I want to talk about is one of the STELLA shortlisted. The book I have read is Homecoming by Elfie Shiosaki. Look, it's probably too early to say that this is my favourite book for 2022. It is absolutely phenomenal, and I am so pleased that it made the shortlist, and I'm so grateful to have read this quite stunning book. It's a story of 4 generations of Aboriginal women, Noongar women in the Pilbara region, which is north of Perth in WA. Look how small it is. So it is within this, there is poetry, prose, oral history, testimonials, transcripts of letters from her great grandfather writing to the chief protector of Aboriginals, Mr. Neville, wanting his children back. And then woven in through that are then the stories of his grandchildren talking about what was happening to them, and they had to get permission to move around their own country. It is absolutely and very intimate at times, but I don't think it's an exaggeration to say this is an epic book. I absolutely loved it. I loved the content, but also the art. So Melissa Lukashenko was talking about the writers and their art, and there is such beautiful and amazing art within this book. I loved it. I love that mix of poetry and the letters and prose. It's quite sparse, but then at the same time, it's saying so much, and it's often, of course, like, while it's very efficient, it's the unsaid as well. So that is Homecoming by Elfie Shiosaki. And I got it from my local library, which is the one, well, I'm very lucky because I live in a very small radius of 4 libraries. So I got this from the Glen Ira Library. What else have I been reading? Now, I have a real passion for non-fiction, and I absolutely love Harry Sadler's Questions Raised by Quolls. Fatherhood and Conservation in an Uncertain World. Now, I have to say that up until recently, I wasn't very familiar with a quoll. They're an Australian marsupial, and they're as cute as anything. But I just heard a radio documentary about them today, and they're not beyond eating people's faces, and they are scavengers, but I think they're a little bit more kind of relentless scavengers than the Tasmanian devil, which has been very much maligned and misunderstood. So really, this is about the lament of climate change. Sadler is a Melbourne writer. He's a nature writer, and the story begins where he tells the story of the first time he ever saw a quoll when he was a young boy out camping with his father. And it really is about the progression of how he ages and becomes a father himself, and the way the world is just accelerating. And then while the modern world accelerates, the natural environment is being decimated. And, these rare animals never used to be so rare. And we killed them all in Victoria, not just colonialists, but, throughout the 1920s. And cats were blamed for the taking of chickens when it was Quolls. I thought this was an absolutely beautiful book. Questions Raised by Quolls by Harry Sadler. Now, I said before, I think I've got my book for 2022, but it's in stiff competition with this absolutely gorgeous book. It's a few years old. It's David Dufty's Radio Girl, the story of extraordinary Mrs. Mac pioneering engineer and wartime legend. So Violet Mackenzie was Australia's first female electrical engineer, and she was an electrician as well. And she went on to train women in Morse code and then men in the army as well. And she started, and we know very little about her. I knew very little about her. I thought David Dufty's telling of this story was absolutely gorgeous. Look, I'm not one for history. I do find it a bit dull, but his writing, well, one, the way he writes about this magnificent woman, and his writing is very tender toward her. It's full of these gorgeous little anecdotes that take place. He has huge respect for Violet Mackenzie, and his knowledge is quite meticulous, and it's got some lovely photographs in it. It'll take you through Australia during this, in the lead up to the Second World War and afterwards as well. And this was a time where people kind of just got on with it, which is something I think maybe we have lost. It's something to definitely be admired, and I am a huge admirer of Violet Mackenzie now, and just kind of getting on with things. So that's A Radio Girl by David Dufty. I think it came out in 2020. So if you can find a copy, I highly recommend this book. It's absolutely gorgeous. Now, another non-fiction book that I have been dipping in and out of is Charlotte Wood, The Luminous Solution, Creativity, Resilience and the Inner Life. So this is, Charlotte Wood is an Australian novelist. She talks about the components of art, and what makes an artist and what plagues an artist, and how I don't really think that you have to be a writer or an artist to read this particular book. This is one I am dipping in and out of. So that is Charlotte Wood, The Luminous Solution. And what am I reading at the moment? You Knew My Name by Jacqueline Bublitz. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly, Jacqueline. Look, there's my bookmark. I'm sort of 3/4 of the way through. Do not tell me what happens. This book is set in New York. It's about an Australian woman. She's in her 30s, you know, she's not married, she hasn't got kids, so she kind of runs away to New York, and she comes across a body, a young woman's body. Now, the interesting thing is that the first person part in this book, it's got one narrator, and that narrator is the dead young woman, but she's not referred to as the dead young woman. So very much in crime books, we always hear, you know, about the investigation and not about the woman. So, you know, not dissimilar to The Lovely Bones in that way, but also starkly different. I think it's an examination of death. And look, if you look at the cover with all the flowers and you know, her name in pink and the author endorsements, yes, it's commercial fiction, but I think it's so much more than that. I think it does border literary fiction. There are some beautiful passages in this book. I think she's a remarkable writer. I am totally engrossed in this story. I'll probably, hopefully, finish it tonight. So that's Jacqueline Bublitz, Before You Knew My Name. Another highly recommended. Now, some books I am going to read. So this one is also on the STELLA shortlist. I just picked it up from another local library, the Port Phillip Library, Anwen Crawford, No Document. A friend of mine, she is keen on going to see movies that she knows nothing about. You know, if she does know about them, of course she'll go, but if you invite her to a movie, she says, don't tell me about it, I don't want to know, I just want to go in and embrace it. Now, how many of us can say that, you know, about books? So all I know, I presume it's poetry by looking at it, but I know nothing about this particular book. And even the blurb at the back says, and our secret was all of us together in the two of us. Always we wanted that always. That's all I know about it. And that's a good thing. I'm looking forward to reading this particular book. Also, on my to be read pile, I have been to 2 book launches in the past week, both at readings in Carlton. Toni Jordan, Dinner with the Schnables. Now, Toni Jordan was saying that she wrote this book in Melbourne during, I think, the first lockdown. And in that time, she watched programs like Schitt's Creek and the one about the Ted Lasso. And in those particular stories, people are nice to each other, but also it's people who are trying to show their love, like flawed people trying to show their love and getting it wrong. And that's what she was saying this book was about. I haven't started it. I am looking forward to reading it. Now, also, the other launch I went to the other day is the gorgeous Paddy O'Reilly, Other Houses. I know nothing about this book except it has got the most beautiful cover, a hardcover book. So it's got a red cover and then sort of this teal blue and then yellow hardback. How gorgeous. And a hardback as well. I did buy this, I think I bought this in February, and I started reading it and I had to stop because it was too beautiful. And I thought, this really needs me to sit down over the weekend and just read the whole thing. But then, of course, other books started getting in the way. And as I was saying earlier, I'm actually not that fast a reader. In fact, I'm quite a slow reader, and then I get distracted with other books. This is the memoir of Natasha Sholl, and she was quite young when her husband died very unexpectedly. It's the story of grief, and it is really beautifully written, and at the same time, of course, nothing is without humour. Nothing is ever, like, life is not miserable all the time. Well, for some people it is, but within that, you know, there are wry observations and funny, weird things that happen. I mean, life isn't happy all the time. I mean, how interesting would that be? It wouldn't, well, it'd be rather nice, but it actually wouldn't be interesting, and it wouldn't make for fully rounded people, you know. Look, surely, you know, people who live backward, you know, maybe I would like to be ignorant and happy. A beautifully written memoir that powerfully delivers the wisdom each of us will need at some point. And that's Sarah Krasnostein, who wrote The Trauma Cleaner and The Believers. This is a book for anyone who has ever loved someone who has died, or has ever loved someone, because grief is the language of love after all. Beautiful book. And Natasha, I really am going to read this book. Now, the other thing that I am going to read, it's not a book, it's the quarterly essay. Now, I don't always get these. I read these, very few and far between, but this one is written by Sarah Krasnostein, and I loved The Believers. Not drowning, not waving, drowning, mental illness and vulnerability in Australia. It's an essay for those people who aren't aware of the quarterly essay. They're published by Black Ink, and in the back they also have correspondence where people write their response to the previous quarterly essay, which was actually written by Jess Hill, the previous one, and I read some of the correspondence, and now I want to go back and read the previous essay. But in this one, Krasnostein charts the story of 3 women who went through the system, I think maybe the hospital system with mental illness, and the response that they got. So it's become this real thing in Australia with the Are You OK Day, and, you know, in workforce cultures about, you know, well-being is absolutely huge. But, you know, you might say to someone, are you okay? What if they say no? What are you going to say instead? As in this essay, Krasnostein is arguing that Australia, I mean, we're a rich country. I don't think there's any argument there. We have the resources to make our mental health system much better than it is, or to work. And she may even, you know, chart what we can do. So I'm looking forward to that one. So these are the books I have read. These are the books I am going to read, and this is the book I'm currently reading. Not that big a pile, but you know, you do your best. And I hope you enjoyed my video. Let me know if you have read any of these books, if you'd like to know anything more about these particular books, which book you think I should get on to next after well, I know which one I am. Where's she gone? Well, there it is, right in the middle. That's the one I'll be getting on to next, hopefully. And are you reading anything from the STELLA Prize? And I'll see you next time on 30 Books.